So let's start with the project idea. You have a general topic idea, for example, communicable diseases. That's great. Or another general idea, antimicrobial resistance. What you then want to do is get more specific. What is it about antimicrobial resistance? What is it about communicable diseases that is interesting to you? Something very specific. For example, are you going to compare the incidence of a specific communicable disease in one country with another country? Why are you selecting these two countries? What is it that is interesting about these two countries that you think it would be good to know the burden of disease in these two countries? The burden of the specific disease that you want to look at, this specific communicable disease in these two countries. What are we going to learn from your project, having assessed the burden of disease? Now, when I say the burden of disease, I will say how we're going to measure that. Earlier, I talked about incidence. That will be an indicator for us. So the incidence of this particular disease is how we will measure the burden of the disease in country 1 and country 2. So you see, my first interest was communicable diseases. I then had to think about what is it about communicable disease that I'm interested in. I decided on one particular disease. For example, let me say I'm going to choose tuberculosis. So I then say I want to look at the burden of tuberculosis in country 1 compared with the burden of tuberculosis in country 2. But if I go to the databases, for example, the World Health Organization Global Health Observatory database, am I going to find data that just says burden of tuberculosis in this country and burden of tuberculosis in another country? I don't think so. So I need to think of what will I use, or what data will I select from this database to give me insight into the burden of disease. Now, if I don't even know what burden of disease means, I need to do some reading from the literature, right? Maybe get a dictionary, maybe go to some scientific databases and look at studies that have a title of burden of disease and see what they measured. Now, because I have done some reading, I will choose so. If I want to use incidence as the indicator to measure burden of disease, I need to know what incidence means. Incidence refers to the number of new cases of a disease in a population over a specific period of time. So now we have some new information. If I'm going to be looking at a specific period of time, which time period am I going to select? And why is that time period of interest to me? All right. All these questions I am posing will add to your project title. You see, we'll come up with a final project title in a minute. And it will also help you to develop the introduction section of your project. It will show us that you have some insight as to why you did certain things. So that's what we call your rationale. Your thinking behind selecting the time period. Your thinking behind selecting country 1 and country 2. Your thinking behind choosing to compare country 1 and country 2. Your thinking behind selecting this specific disease. Is it because, the rates of the disease are increasing globally? And then you make up a good story supported with literature. When I say literature, you're going to maybe PubMed or Google Scholar and finding relevant, reliable information about the burden of this disease, and then tell us why you've selected these two countries. So there's a lot of things there are a lot of things I am hinting at here. But let's stay focused. Let's come back to developing this project idea. So I'm just talking through my thoughts and actually recording this as I'm speaking. Okay, so we started off with communicable diseases. I then decided to choose a specific disease, tuberculosis, because I know maybe the disease cases are rising, or and then maybe they're rising in a particular country compared with another. I want to compare two countries in the developing region, or one developing with another developed region, or I don't know, in a specific region you choose two countries, or you need to have some reasoning behind why you selected those countries. What's important about them? All right. Okay. So finally, and then we've talked about how we're going to measure burden of disease. Because I know some information, I have looked at incidence. I'm going to look at the new cases the number of new cases of tuberculosis in my specific population over a specific period of time. Let's say I'm going to select between the years 2010 to 2023, something like that. Now, I'm thinking about that because there's some unique years between that time period. Okay, so my final project title could be something like epidemiological study comparing the incidence of tuberculosis in country 1 and country 2 from 2010 to 2023. I could rewrite that. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I'm actually just recording this as I speak. So, or I could say comparing the incidence of tuberculosis, a comparison of the incidence of tuberculosis in country 1 and country 2 between 2010 to 2013. So that's my project title. I then want to look at what is my aim and what are my objectives. So my objectives are the things that I'm going to do in order to help me to achieve my aim. Right? So let's think about some study objectives. In my case, I would say maybe my first one is to quantify and compare the annual incidence rates of tuberculosis in Africa and Asia from 2010 to 2023 using data from the Global Health Observatory database. I might then say I will, number 2, analyze the trends in the incidence of TB in both regions, because Africa is one of the WHO regions, in both continents or regions over the specified period, identifying any significant increases or decreases and the potential factors influencing these trends. Then I might say if the data is available, I might want to examine or analyze the influence of demographic factors associated with TB incidence in Africa and Asia. And those demographic factors, I could say I will look at the impact of age and gender. So this will help to understand the population groups most affected by the disease. So that would be it. Maybe I might identify and compare major risk factors contributing to TB incidence in Africa and Asia. So I might say identify and compare major risk factors contributing to tuberculosis incidence in Africa and Asia, including socioeconomic conditions, healthcare access, things like that. All right, so those would be ideas for some research study objectives. I would want to be very clear about where I'm extracting the data from in my writing. So when you look at preparing your first TMA, that needs to be very clear what it is exactly you're extracting, right? And then my aim is to compare the incidence rates of TB in Africa and Asia from 2010 to 2023, identifying trends, risk factors, and implications for public health interventions. So that's that. I have done this just to give you an idea of how I would walk through preparing a project idea, thinking about my aim, thinking about my research objectives. And there's loads more to this, but this is the first step, because when you look at that data, you then think about how you're going to analyze it. There's so much guidance in the module materials, but I thought if I were to talk through what I would do, perhaps that would help you as well. And don't take this as the best strategy. This is a step, towards achieving something. There are so many ways we can come to the project idea. But at this level, this is one way that you can use. Think of a broad area that you're interested in and then try to make it as specific as possible. And don't limit yourself to this idea or the ideas available in the module resources. They're just to get you thinking. And that's one of the lovely things about research. Get us thinking, what interests us, asking questions as to why. When you begin to ask, why is this like this? You're already thinking of the project idea. Creating that sort of curiosity, being inquisitive, is what helps us to answer questions about the world we currently live in, to aid policy changes, interventions, to understand why something is the way it is, to begin to understand. We might not fully understand it, but we can add value to current knowledge. And if you approach research projects in this way, you see that you develop as a scientist, as a person generally, and it gets quite interesting as we go. So what are objectives? Just been doing a little reading online. So as I said, we have a study goal. That's like your aim. I want to see what the incidence or what the burden of TB is in these particular regions of the world. How will I achieve this? I'm going to extract data about the incidence levels to help me to understand the burden of TB in these countries. I will extract data from the World Health Organization Global Health Observatory. All right. So the objectives, think about them as your to-do list, written very clearly, succinctly, that shows the reader exactly what you want to achieve and how you're going to do it. All right. So if we start from the beginning, what do you want to study? So that's your topic. Why do you want to study it? The significance of the research question, we covered all of that. And then the objectives then it's a list, maybe 4 or 5 things that give you a clear direction for how you're going to answer that research question. I am going to analyze the incidence rates of TB in country 1 and country 2 between years 2010 to 2020, whatever years you have chosen. So having done that, you're going to assess the trend of TB incidence in country 1 from 2010 to 2023 and assess, or we have some keywords, I'll put them later, the trend of TB in country 2 from this date to this date, and then you compare the trends of TB incidence between the two countries. All right, I hope that helps. So the objectives this is what I'm doing. These are the list of the things I will do in order to answer the research question. When writing research objectives, you might see certain what I call action words. So usually it will start with to, to analyze, to assess, to investigate, to compare, to explore, to identify, to determine. I like more action ones like something you're actually doing, you're analyzing, evaluate, compare, assess, things like that. And know what these words mean. So analyze, to study or examine in detail to understand something better. Investigate, you're carrying out a systematic inquiry to uncover facts. Compare, you're noting similarities and differences. Assessing something, determining the significance, value, or importance of something. So usually objectives will start with objective 1 to analyze the incidence rates of TB in country 1 and compare it with the incident rate of TB in country 2, something like that. So if you're going to be looking at maybe per 100,000 population, you might even want to make it more specific. To analyze the incidence rates per 100,000 population, the incidence rate of TB per 100,000 population in country 1. To analyze the incidence rate or to determine the incidence rate of TB per 100,000 population in country 2. To compare the incidence rate of TB per 100,000 population in country 1 and country 2, something like that. All right. To assess the to analyze the trends or to assess the to assess the impact of demographic factors in brackets age and sex on the incidence of TB in the country 1 and country 2, something like that. All right. Okay. So that's it. I hope that this helps you to formulate your own project ideas and to really begin to think about what your aim is and what your objectives will be, and make sure that you read the guidance in your respective modules. Aim is and what your objectives will be, and make sure that you read the guidance in your respective modules to also help you structure this appropriately. All right, all the best.